I have Greg Sullavan in my studio. Greg works for Canon Australia and is an ambassador for Canon Collective, and he has brought along all of his lenses, and we're going to talk everything lens in this session, and we're going to break it down. But to give you a bit of a background about Greg, we've known each other for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years probably?
Yeah, possibly longer.
Yeah, and we met at our local association, photography association. We both love entering print competitions and judging and all of that kind of stuff, so we've spent a fair bit of time together, and it's been lots of fun. We've actually had lots of fun, haven't we?
Yeah, many times.
Greg has been a photographer for a long time. He's had a wedding and portrait business since 2005. He's won countless awards. His work is often featured in magazines as well.
Occasionally. I've had a little bit of luck.
So for those of you that don't know much about the Canon Collective here in Australia, and Greg being an ambassador, I'm going to let you tell them exactly what that involves and all the different things that you get to do.
Yeah, sure, Kelly. So my job is to work for the Canon Collective, and we create photographic experiences for photographers. So it could be anything from going out photographing like an Insta-meet at sunset, right through to some of the bigger international workshops.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. We do underwater stuff, we do sunsets, we do wild animals, we do birds, we do macro, anything. So anything is a good excuse to do an event.
Oh, absolutely. Now he's in a baby studio. Which is why we want to talk about lenses, because Greg's got so much experience in multiple genres that you know which lens is best suited for which activity.
I do.
Right?
Yep.
And it's a question that we get asked all the time. What lens do you use? What's the best lens? And regardless of the brand, today we're actually going to break the lens down. Greg's actually going to explain to us what's inside a lens. We're going to talk about f-stops. We're going to talk about focal lengths. We're going to talk about prime lenses, zoom lenses, macro lenses, you name it. Everything we're going to discuss. And we're going to start right off with the basics and then move through to some more advanced technical stuff that I have no idea. It's going to be great.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kelly.
And then I'm going to shoot with some of these lenses. And
All
you
right.
can teach me what to do.
Sounds like a plan. I think you'll teach me a bit too, so don't worry about that.
Alrighty. Do you want to start first with what is actually inside a lens?
Yeah, so basically I like to think of a lens as an eyeball. So the camera is the brain and the lens is the iris. So as you see with any lens, it's basically an optical product. It really is like a light tight little tube where the light goes in one end and it hits the sensor on the camera and creates an image. So I like to think of it like that is what the iris and the eye does. So we have many different kinds of lenses. We've got zooms, we've got fixed focal length, we've got telephotos and macros and extenders, extension tubes and all sorts of wonderful things.
Yeah. You get to play with these ones often, don't you?
Yeah, and you know, like a tool in a tradesman's toolbox, each kind of lens has a different job. So basically, if you think in your mind, what kind of result do I want from my photograph? Then you choose the lens to do the job you want it to do.
Radio.
Yep.
So I would never have anything like this in the studio. I tend to stick to the smaller ones. My favorite lens is a 24-70. And I think the reason I love it so much is because it's obviously an amazing piece of glass, but it's so versatile for everything that I want to do inside the studio. And can you explain the difference between, for those that don't know, the difference between prime lenses, zoom lenses and macros?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I'd break it down, and you mentioned that 24-70 is your favourite lens, and that's why we call that a standard zoom lens, because it really covers a lot of that really common focal length. But we sort of have two other categories of lenses. We have wide-angle lenses, which covers a wider field of view.
Yeah.
And we've got
so
standard
how many
zoom.
millimetres would that be?
So maybe a 16-35 is a good wide-angle lens.
Yeah.
You can get them as wide as like 8mm if you like the fish eyes, which creates that really sort of 180-degree view, which maybe is not so good for portrait photography, depending on what you want to achieve. The standard zoom is perfect because it's similar optics to the way that the human eye perceives focal lengths.
Yeah.
But we also got the super teles and the telephoto lenses as well, which are really good for sports photography or taking a photo of something that's far away and making it look close to the lens, like bird photography, animals, where you don't want to actually get close to the lion out in the field in Africa.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
me not, no.
Yeah. But we've also got what we would call, fixed focal length lenses, which don't have a zoom. So they might be things like your 35mm, your 50mm, 85mm. You've got zoom lenses, which will go like from 24 to 70. And then you've got things with like fixed apertures as well, which means that as you zoom out, you don't lose any light. So they'll stay at a constant f2.8.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talking about focal length, that's a huge part of it, isn't it? And understanding, exactly which lens is best suited to your type of photography.
Yeah,
and,
100%.
And selecting it.
Yeah, so for example, if I want to take a portrait which is flattering for a subject, I wouldn't use a wide angle lens unless I want to make them look small in a bigger landscape. Like if I want to take a nice photograph of a bride and groom out in the distance with mountains and everything like that, a wide angle lens is great. But if I was taking your portrait right now, I'm going to make your face look really big and your legs small, which you're probably not going to like. So it's really important to get your focal length right when you're photographing people in particular.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's why when I'm using my 24 to 70, I'm constantly zoomed in at a 70mm focal length, because at that point, I'm not getting any distortion on the baby.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a much more flattering perspective. Like if you were using a wide angle lens too close, you make the nose look wider and the eyes look funny. But as you step back and stand off the subject and zoom in, you make that perspective more pleasing, like a nicer kind of perspective.
Right. So if I was to zoom out with my 24 to 70, because I know this is a question that I've been asked multiple times in workshops and things like that. If I zoom out to say 35mm with my 24 to 70, is the distortion going to be the same with that lens as what it is with a 35mm prime lens?
Yeah, that's a good question. The distortion will be the same. Obviously, it depends on your aperture as well to see how much depth of field you get in the photograph.
Yep.
But in terms of distortion on your lenses, it's going to be the same.
Right, because I get asked that all the time, and I actually don't shoot with a 35mm lens, so I've never been able to really compare the difference between those two frames, which is what we're going to have some fun with shortly when we pick up our camera and show you some results from these lenses. But now, because we've talked about focal length, let's talk about attaching these lenses to an actual camera body, and whether or not you're going to have what the difference is between a full frame camera and a crop sensor.
Yeah, sure. So focal length in your lenses can actually change depending on what camera body you put them on. For example, our 80Ds or the 7Ds, so what we call APS-C sensors, they're a smaller sensor than a full frame camera. So for example, a full frame, the size of the sensor in the camera is the same size as a 35mm negative. If you sort of remember the film days, it's exactly the same size. Whereas the APS-C sensor is 1.6 times smaller. So you've got to multiply the focal length by 1.6 times. Right. So say, for example, your 28mm lens at 28mm on a APS-C sensor will become 35mm. Yep.
Very, very interesting. I'm learning a lot.
But on a full frame, you get full value out of your lenses, which means that, your 24-70 at 24mm will be 24mm on a full frame camera.
And just throwing a random question in there, when you get that lens vignetting,
yes.
Yeah, what causes that for people who aren't...
Well, usually curvilinear distortion and vignetting and things like that are usually caused by an inferior lens, their optical qualities.
Right.
So the more you pay for your lens, the less chromatic aberration, curvilinear distortion, vignetting, basically optical errors in your lenses. Okay. So the more you pay, the better the lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And there are, let's go down here, let's talk about that. We don't want to talk about price or anything, but for example, a 50mm lens is extremely popular in newborn photography.
Yeah. So the 50mm lens is a really popular lens for portrait photographers because it's a very similar focal length to what the human eye perceives. So it gives us what we call like an honest perspective because it looks the same. It's not too wide and it's not too, zoomed in. I've got three 50mm lenses here. So we've got we call this one, the 50mm 1.8, the Nifty 50, because they really are only about $120. So everyone should have a Nifty 50 in their kit.
Yeah, in Australian dollars.
Australian dollars, correct. So you've got the 50mm 1.4 here, which introduces the ultrasonic motor, f1.4. We'll talk about what that means in a second.
Yep.
And then we've got the 50mm f1.2, which is our L series. So L series is like the Canon professional grade of lenses.
Yeah, I have one of these and they are so beautiful.
Yeah, at f1.2?
Yeah, 1.2. It's
beautiful.
It's beautiful. But the reason that I don't use it primarily is because I find that when I'm photographing, say, a baby in a large prop, I can't get the whole the whole setup in, and that means I would have to stand on something above a baby, which in my opinion is dangerous. So that's why I love that option with my 24-70, which means I can zoom right out, and the baby's in the center of the frame, so there's little distortion. I am going to get some around the outside of the prop, but I mean, really, it's not that bad. So I'd rather risk that than obviously the safety. So yeah, but that's why I don't use it primarily in the studio, but it is still an incredible portrait lens. Okay, so now that we've talked about focal length, we've talked about 50s, let's talk a little bit about aperture, because some of these have what you said was separate aperture, and then others have, you know, a huge range.
Yeah, no, that's true. And the aperture is like the little iris inside the lens that opens and closes to let more or less light in. So it's one way that photographers control it, the amount of light hitting the sensor. But it also controls the depth of field, which I know you know as well. But, you know, we've got what we call, say, you know, your fixed aperture lenses. So this is f1.4. But this is also relevant with zoom lenses as well. Like say the 24-70 2.8, which you like. It doesn't matter how far I zoom it out between 24-70. I'm not going to lose any f-stops, whereas, you know, that's what we call a constant aperture lens. Right. Whereas, say, maybe a kit lens that comes with the camera, it could be an 18 to 55 mil, which goes from f4 to 5.6. So as you zoom out, the light has to travel further down a lens barrel, which means it actually can drop off and you lose a stop or two of light.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear about that, because like, I mean, for myself, I don't use one of those lenses, so I'm not aware that actually happens. But occasionally, you know, if I'm in a group of photographers and I'm helping them with their focal lengths and their aperture, it's good for me to understand that as well. But in terms of understanding that aperture, when you say that it opens right up and it allows that light coming in, I think when I first started photography, that was probably the hardest thing, because, you know, you talk about going up to f16, but you don't realize that that's actually closing. It's making the aperture a lot smaller than what it actually is, and at 2.8 it's really making it nice and bright and open. And it's funny that you talked about the eye, because I was taught that imagine it like a blink, you know, how long you blink for and is the shutter, and then obviously how wide you have your eye open is the aperture. It's kind of funny in that aspect of understanding how that all works, and they work together to create those, you know, the image that you want.
Well, you know, if you turn the lights off and you're in the dark, the pupils go wider. So it's like an aperture. You turn the light on and they contract and go smaller. But I have to be honest, sometimes I still get confused about the bigger number, the smaller the hole type thing. So
I don't think you're alone.
No.
And then talking a little bit about that focal plane, because at, you know, 1.4 your focal plane is so narrow, it's so short. Obviously then when you shut that aperture down to say f8, you're going to need a longer shutter speed to be able to allow more light in, but you're really, you know, you're increasing that focal plane so much more to allow more subjects in focus. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, we control our aperture and the amount, as professional photographers, the amount we want to control in focus. So I imagine if you're photographing a person at f1.4, you can have the eyeball razor sharp and the eyelashes going out of focus. So you've got to be careful. You know, I know when I first got my first 85mm f1.2, that when I first got it, I was f1.2ing everything. And then I realised when I got the photos back that, you know, most of the stuff is actually out of focus, because it's hard to control and it takes practice. It does. It takes a lot of practice. And is there a perfect aperture for each lens? Well, we're getting into this idea of a lens's aperture. It's kind of got a sweet spot, and it is possible. So usually it's 2 stops over the minimum aperture. Now, so say, for example, an f1.2 lens, f1.4, f1.8, so 2 stops, f1.8 would be that sweet spot of the lens. And they say that you get, you know, a sharper result from understanding this idea of sweet spot. Oh wow, that's good to know. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the structure of these lenses in terms of how they're made. Yeah, good question. You can break that down. Yep, so say the 50mm and the primes are really simple optics because they don't zoom. So that's why we're able to make them faster, which means that they've got less optics, they let more light in, and that's the way you can get like f1.2s, f1.4s. Right. So they're very simple, but when you go to a zoom lens, they have much more elements moving forwards and backwards. So as you zoom, these little elements will move around. So you've got convex and concave and aspherical elements in there all moving together to sort of work together to create light that hits the sensor as a sharp image.
Right.
So they're much more technical and complicated, and that's why you also lose some light. So you might have an f1.2 fixed focal length lens, but an f2.8 zoom lens.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, well, that's all pretty amazing. My head's already buzzing and spinning. In terms of, I know that a lot of people will be looking at the amount of lenses that are sitting here, and it's overwhelming. So for people that are going out and they're wanting to sort of, either upgrade from their first little kit package, or if they're just wanting to introduce a new lens for portraiture, in your opinion, what is probably the most popular focal lengths, and whether it be prime or zoom?
I think that the first lens that a portrait photographer should get is a 50mm, because it'll give them a very nice, honest perspective like we talked about earlier.
Yep.
Plus they can start experimenting with ultra shallow depth of field. So this is a good way of, you hear of bokeh where the background's nice and blurry. So separating a portrait subject from their background just using aperture.
Oh, beautiful.
Yep.
So when we talk about photographing people and taking beautiful portraits, taking photographs of babies is exactly the same. That's what we're doing. And for me, we've already discussed, it's that longer focal length, so I'm not distorting any of the features. It's almost flattening those features, isn't it? And I prefer to shoot, nice and wide open at 2.8, so I get that beautiful soft background and things like that. A lot of photographers photographing babies often use the 35mm lens. For me, I personally don't, because I know that I'm going to get some distortion, but can you break it down a little bit for me some more, so for those that have been interested in purchasing a 35mm can understand the difference of that wider angle, and what it's probably more better suited to?
So this is the Canon, the brand new 35mm lens, f1.4. Tack sharp, beautiful colour reproduction,
and they
everything
are beautiful
like that.
lenses. Like,
Stunning.
don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing it. I love this lens. It's just probably not.
That's right. It's about choosing the right tool for the job that you want to do. And the 35mm is a beautiful lens, but just remember that it gives you a greater field of view, which means that if you want to fill the frame of the camera, like the viewfinder, you've got to come close to the subject or stand off and get like a greater kind of landscape, which is fine. But at 35mm, you just run the problem of having a little bit of distortion, particularly if I'm photographing a portrait. Like if I'm quite tall, so if I'm looking down at somebody, I can make their face look big and their feet look too short, their legs look too short. Right. So I might just want to consider getting down a little bit lower to get on their level, just to give them a more, like a perspective which is more flattering for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so if you were to take a portrait of me with a 35mm lens, what would it do to my face?
Well, it depends on whether I want to fill the frame. If I want a head and shoulders of just your face, I'd probably have to shoot it from here. That causes two problems. I think that it's going to make your features look unflattering, your nose look wide, which people don't really want.
No.
But at the same time, it brings me into your personal space. So, I don't know anybody that can feel comfortable having a camera right in their face.
It's actually a really good point, because you do have to get so close to fill the frame, and you don't want to have to crop your images too much in post-production, because then you're just going to lose all that information. So that's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
I don't want a big nose.
No.
We are going to play with these lenses, and we're going to compare some of the results so you can actually see them as well. But I also want to talk now a little bit more about the structure of this lens, because some of them have got a special coating on them which changes the colour of the glass, doesn't it?
Yeah, we call it, well, Canon calls it the super spectral coating. So when you look at the front of a lens element, it could have a purplish or a green tinge to it. In fact, if you look carefully at the reflections of lights from the ceiling, you'll actually see that there's multiple elements and groups, and they've all got different coloured coatings. And you can see the reflections of the lights in the lens.
Yeah, you can.
But basically what that means is they have these spectral coatings that's like a nano coating that gets applied as the lens is made. So it helps put light that's out of wavelength, such as flare, back into wavelength, and takes away having, loss of light, loss of sharpness, contrast, colour clarity in the shot.
Right.
Yep.
That's very interesting. How does it doesn't affect your images at all in terms of that colour or anything like that?
No, in fact it'll make your images better because it lets more light pass through. So I believe they let 99.9% of light through.
Wow.
So otherwise they'd be reflected back out.
That is so interesting. Yeah. And what I've also noticed is, and I know specifically with the lens that I love to use, No, not that one. Where is it? It's down here.
24-70.
moved it.
I moved it.
Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
This is ultrasonic.
Yes.
So what does that mean exactly?
They're not special powers. Ultrasonic means that it helps pull focus faster. So there is a motor inside the lens that helps it achieve focus faster. See these little contact points on the lenses? That's where electricity and communication flows between the camera body and the lens, which actually powers the ultrasonic motor.
Right.
So there's information and electricity passing between the two, the camera body and the lens.
And not all of these have got special powers like that.
No, they don't. They don't. And usually it's something that, it's a Canon USM or ultrasonic motor is like the proprietary Canon term for it.
Yeah.
But there is a new series of lenses that have something different called step motor.
Right.
So step motor is kind of the same and it still helps the camera achieve focus faster, but it's silent. So it uses a series of magnets to pull focus. So when you're recording video, you don't hear the sound of gears grinding as it's pulling focus.
Okay,
Yep.
That's really interesting, isn't it? And also image stabilization. A lot of these lenses have got that built into them. So what does that exactly do and how does it help?
Yeah, so the optical image stabilizer means there's another kind of motor inside the lens that actually moves. It's like a gyroscope. The lens actually moves up to 900 times a second to counteract camera shake. So as the light sort of comes through on a crooked angle, say if you're using a slow shutter speed and you get a blurry image because you're moving the camera, so this will actually try and correct the light coming through so it hits the sensor straight on, so you don't get that image blur as well.
Yeah.
So
I know the common rule is don't shoot below 60th of a second handheld and things like that, but I often am asked, don't you get camera shake, things like that? But if I am shooting around 50, 60th of a second with that, I notice that, there's no shake whatsoever in there. But you do still have to have a pretty steady hand.
You do have to have a steady hand, and I think it's a game of percentages. In the perfect world, you can shoot at 200th of a second and everything's sharp.
Yep.
But if you do have to shoot at a 60th, it's good to know that the lens has got this ultrasonic motor built in. And they say that it can relieve about 4 stops of camera shake. So if you have to shoot an 1/8 of a second, man, you're going to have to be steady, but you might just get away with it.
Yeah, that's sniper mode. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about L series and non-L series and what the difference is with those.
Yeah, sure. So the Canon L series lenses are Canon's professional range of lenses.
Yep.
So usually they have a better construction quality, metal lens mounts. They also have weatherproofing. So if you are shooting outdoors and it rains, the lens is probably not going to die.
Oh, good.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been in a few of those situations.
Yeah. Well, the L series lenses, you can tell which ones are L series because they actually have the red band around them.
Oh, okay.
Yep. But they are also, so you've got the black ones, which are usually the wider or standard zoom lenses.
Yep.
But the white ones tend to be the outdoor sports kinds of lenses, like the telephotos.
And those L series lenses, they don't fit on those crop sensor bodies, do they?
They do, but that actually brings up a very good point. We do have some EFS lenses here, which are custom made for those APS-C type sensors.
Yeah, and they won't fit on my body, for example, my
No, they
full
won't.
frame.
So you can see it says EFS.
Yeah.
The S stands for short back. So if I show you the difference here, you'll really easily see it. So do you see compared to those two?
Yes.
You've got one that has, it actually sits that little short back inside the body of the camera, and
Right.
it's custom made for APS-C type sensors. And if you try and put that on a full frame body, you're going to knock out the focusing screen and the mirror box assembly.
Yes, I have done that.
So have I.
And I did it in the snow in New Zealand. I tried to put my 60mm macro on my 5D Mark III a few years ago, and the mirror fell out into the snow.
We tend to only do that once, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never again.
Never again.
Yeah, definitely not a good moment. And it was the first day of our holiday.
Well, let me tell you, did you know that the lenses are actually white? They made them white based on the sports photographers who are out in the sun, so they actually reflect light. So the black actually makes them heat up too much. So they make them white to actually reflect light and not heat up too much.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's actually pretty cool. Rightio. So shall we start having a bit of a play with some of these lenses?
Definitely.
So we've got a lens on our body. I'm going to have a bit of a play and test some of these lenses out, and you're going to see the results and Greg's going to explain, you know, what these lenses are capable of and why I'm getting the results. So we're going to start with the 24, which is a wide angle lens. Tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, this is a wide lens. It has the ultrasonic motor. It's not a terribly expensive lens to go with. It starts at f2.8, so you won't get that ultra shallow depth of field. It also has a built-in optical image stabiliser too.
Right, no camera shake.
It's not an L series lens.
It's not an L series.
Yep.
So what I've noticed with this lens is that I've actually got to come in really close. So to be able to fill the frame, and I've still got lots of space around my baby, I've got to get so close with that wide angle. And I'm shooting tethered, so we can show you the results here of this particular this lens. But without having another image to compare it to, Greg, I can already see the distortion in the baby's nose and that eye there that's in focus.
Yeah, unless you're going for that sort of that bulbous wraparound distorted look, I wouldn't suggest using that for this kind of shot.
No, and I mean the baby's face is quite centered in the frame, but it's still causing that distortion. So it doesn't matter if it's in the center or out towards the edge of the frame. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Okay, so let's head up to our 35mm and see what happens here. Okay, give you that one back. This is a lot heavier than I thought it would be.
Yeah, well, this is a Pro L series lens. So in my opinion, this is one of the best lenses that Canon actually makes.
Yep.
It's a 35mm f1.4. It's got a very special kind of optical spectral coating on it, which actually reduces chromatic aberration even further than the regular stuff.
Wow. And what do we got? 1.4. What in your opinion, what would you recommend the aperture in terms of its sweet spot should be?
Well, you know, you can shoot with this lens at f1.4. It's an outstanding lens, and I think it really is the pinnacle of where, you know, Canon's best lenses are at. It's going to be super sharp at high resolution. But, you know, if I was shooting it, I think you've got to think about more how much depth of field you want. So I'd be thinking that probably f1.8, f2 is a good place to start if you want to blur the background.
Okay, I'm going to shoot this at f1.4. Get it right, Kelly.
Yep.
And then I'm going to bring it back to 2.8, which is where I normally kind of feel a bit more comfortable
Sure.
in terms of getting that focus right. So I'm still going to have to get quite close though, aren't I?
Yep.
Okay. So 1.4. And we're photographing my silicon baby here, so there's no real eye line to focus on, but I'm trying to focus right on that eye line there. So we'll be able to compare the 1.4 to 2.8, and you can see that looks pretty sharp, doesn't it? Nice. Let's go to 2.8 and see what this baby does. Yeah, that looks good.
I can see from here that you're probably getting both eyes, you know, close to being in focus rather than just the front one.
Yeah, you can really see that depth of field, can't you? I mean, it's subtle, but it's just so beautiful and soft. Like, look at that background. That's really incredible. But again, I am photographing with a 35mm lens, so I'm getting some distortion. The baby's face doesn't actually look like that.
Shall we try something else?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go. What do we want to go? 50?
50mm, f1.2.
Thank you. I do love this lens. So this is a 1.2, so I'm going to shoot it at 1.2 and then I'm going to come back up and shoot it again at 2.8. Let's see how steady my hand is. Wow, I don't have to get as close.
Yeah, you can see that you're a lot further back now.
Okay, that's at 1.2. Whoa.
Yeah, the f1.2, I think you can get sometimes when you get your first f1.2 a bit carried away with overdoing the f1.2. You've got to be very selective about when you use that ultra shallow depth of field.
Yeah, and I think too, it's got a lot to do with the style of image that you're going for. Like if I was shooting, you know, a baby in a prop, like a basket on its back, and shooting into the light and getting a beautiful backlit shot, then I would be going for that really, really, really narrow focal plane because, you know, I want to highlight I really want to focus on the light hitting, you know, the detail in the skin, which I think would be beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. And the background just goes beautiful bokeh.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can see here, I've got texture in my blanket, but you can't actually see any texture behind the baby whatsoever at 1.2. So I'm going to increase, I'm going to go 2.8. Because that's where I kind of like to sit. Just gives that focal plane a little more. Now I've got to move back a bit for it to focus because I got too close.
Yeah, there is such thing as a minimum focusing distance for each lens too.
Yeah, a good point actually, because I notice when I'm trying to get some close-up detail shots at 70 mil on my 24 to 70, I can't get as close as what I want to, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, you do have to move back until you can start to focus. So that is beautiful.
You can see the detail in the foreground as well. It's coming back. Now,
50 mil lens, we talked about this before, it is a beautiful lens to have, and in terms of portrait photography, it's as close as what we can physically see, right, in terms of...
Yeah, a lot of photojournalists like to use this kind of lens because it gives that honest perspective, which just happens to give this credibility to your shot to make it look like the way the human eye can perceive it.
Yeah, and so the difference with the other 50 mils that we've got there's a 1.4 and a 1.8.
Yes.
So they're still great lenses, it's just that the 1.2 is that step above. It's an L series lens, so you're going into that more professional range.
That's like weatherproofing, build quality, that kind of thing as well. Yep.
It is a beautiful lens, and you can feel it in the weight too.
It's in the weight, yep.
Yeah, but there is still nothing wrong with a 1.4 or a 1.8 if you're looking for a more affordable lens that can still give you that beautiful depth of field.
Yes, and the image quality on those cheaper 50 mils, they'll still shoot a billboard. They're very simple optics, and the image quality is outstanding.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Okay, let's swap it out. What are we going to go to now?
I'm going to give you an 85mm f1.2, one of my favourite lenses of all time.
Okay.
Thank you. Now this is the older version of the 85mm 1.2. There is actually some newer ones out there. They've just launched the 1.2 Mark II and 1.4 Mark II as well. Sorry, Mark I.
So I actually have this lens, and I do love it when I'm taking portraitures. And when I'm doing an adult or a child, this is probably one of my favourite lenses to pop on my camera.
Yeah, it means that you're able to stand off your subject a little bit further, and it gives you a really nice perspective because you've got to sort of step back a bit.
Yeah, so I've just moved my stool back because I already know that I'm not going to be able to get as close as what I need to.
Yep.
But it is a longer focal length, so it's going to really flatten those features. Oh my God, you can feel it moving. Okay, it's really having trouble focusing here because I'm too close, and I'm going to drop it down to 1.2 too.
Yep.
Okay, let me move back a bit more. Okay, I'm still moving back to get that focus. There it is. That's amazing. Oh, let's adjust that shutter speed. I got a little carried away.
That is a lot different in perspective, you can see it.
So look at how much space though is around the baby, because that's as close as I could actually physically get to make it focus on that eye line. And that's at 1.2, but that background is absolutely insane. It's beautiful. But again, if I'm going for a more close-up shot, this is not the ideal lens for me, because I want to come in nice and close and fill the frame with the baby for some of my setups. So in terms of versatility, I'm not going to change my lenses a million times throughout a shoot. So I think I'll stick with this one for my more grown-up portraits.
Yeah, and I like to use that outdoors as well.
Yeah, I'm going to change it to 2.8 as well, just to continue with that comparison.
Yep.
Still beautiful depth of field. It's not going to be a massive difference, but when we get these files up and available for everyone to see, you're really going to be able to see that difference in that focal plane. Okay, what's up next?
Well, I'm going to give you a special one. This is one of my favourites. It's the 135. So I think this is a great portrait lens.
Rightio. That's heavy, that 85.
It does have a bit of a cult following. It's a famous lens.
Okay, 135. What is this? 1.2 again?
That is 1.4.
1.4.
Oh, sorry, I tell a lie. It's an f2.
Yep, it is.
Yep.
Oh, now I've got to move back in further. Okay, turn my camera on. So let's find out where that focal point is. And keep moving back, Kelly. This is ridiculous.
I might need to get you outside for this one.
Yeah. Do you know what, Greg? Can you move my posing bag just a bit, very gently?
Certainly can.
I've got that baby.
I don't want to wake the baby.
No, she's balanced very strategically. Okay, so... Wow, so this is a prime lens.
Yeah, and I think that you're able to stand off your subject fairly far. It gives you great what we call depth of field compression, which makes the background look like it's come up really close behind the subject. Very narrow field of view as well.
Now I feel, because I'm so far away from my subject, and that's as close as I can physically get to focus, I feel because I'm shooting at f2, that my hand's shaking more. I feel like it's actually harder to get that focus because I'm so far away from the subject and the baby seems so small in the frame.
Yeah, I wonder whether having a closer focusing distance actually gives you this feeling of being closer to the subject, as in maybe I'm too detached from it now.
Yeah. And I'm so far back, and I know that when I'm working with babies that, I like to be able to be within arm's reach at all times. So that's why I love, with my 24 to 70, when I'm at 70 mil, I can still be quite close to the subject to get that focus. But yeah, with this one, beautiful, beautiful. Did we get it to come up? Let's take another one. And look at that, it's struggling here, and I'm just moving back slowly to get that focal point. There it is. Oh, I feel like the camera's moving so much. But my hands aren't shaking, it's just because I feel like I'm so far away.
Well, it's a greater focal length as well. So, you vibrate a millimetre here, it's like moving a centimetre out there. So that's why it looks like you're moving more.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, we've got a bit of a problem with our tether, so I'm just going to turn my camera on and off again so we get this, because I think it's really important for everyone to see these different results. Okay, let me turn it back on and see what happens here. Okay, let's have another shot. Yeah, there's so much more space around the baby.
Yeah, it's kind of getting lost there in the photo.
That's right. And don't get me wrong, I love a little bit of negative space, but if you want a lens that you're going to be able to come in and get some nice close-up shots and things like that, this is not the puppy for you. Okay. Oh, let's do this at 2.8 as well, because I shot that at f2.
You can see it, like it does have a lovely perspective. Like the baby looks great in the photograph.
Yeah, that's right. For this particular setup, perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect. Yeah, you'll be able to see that focal plane, the difference there between f2 and 2.8. Even though it's going to be very minimal, there's still a difference. And that's why I'm shooting at 2.8, because you don't necessarily need to go all the way down to f2 to get beautiful results with this lens. Radio. What are you going to hit me with?
Geez, I don't know. I think
Don't give me that 400.
Do you think? Well, I'm either thinking, why don't we give you a break on the 200mm f2, which is a little bit, maybe it's a bit heavy for the studio, but I would suggest, would you like to try a macro lens?
Yes, I would. And this brings up another great conversation that we can have about macro and getting detail shots, because I know when I've got babies in that have got gorgeous long eyelashes, and recently I had a baby in with beautiful big lips, and the mum was like, oh, can you get a close-up of those? With my 24-70, there is a macro function on there, but I still can't get close enough for that with that focal distance. Yeah. I still can't get close enough to fill the frame with it. So tell me what's the difference is between a macro lens and using the macro function on my 24-70?
That's a good question. You know, there's a lot of lenses that have the word macro on there. And I think the idea of that is it just means that it can decrease the minimum focusing distance, because you're kind of giving the illusion that the subject looks bigger in the photo, but the difference is you're filling the frame just by bringing the camera in closer. Right. So that really is what a macro lens does. So the Canon EF 100mm macro is really, I think it's the best lens in its class that will do that. It has the built-in image stabiliser as well. It's an f2.8.
Yeah.
But it is technically also a prime lens. It is 100mm. So you could still photograph it from back as well as coming closer and doing the macro as well.
Alrighty, let's test that out. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to have to move my chair. I got a little comfy back there. So if I was going to focus on the eye line here, I'm going to have to come in really close. Let's make sure that our tether's still working.
Now, do you mind if I have a little peek at something? There's something I didn't do there. I've just got to make sure that there's a switch on the side of your macro lens there that can make sure that you're using the full focal range of the lens.
Yeah.
So if you have some problems sometimes with your lens sort of hunting, it sort of doesn't know whether you're focusing on something close or far away, you can actually flick a switch and say it will only search in the focal range between, say, 30 and 50 centimetres. Or if you use the full range, it will go through all of its focal lengths looking for the subject to focus on.
Okay, I understand that now. That's a great way of explaining it. And stabiliser is off.
I would probably switch it on. So the previous person that used that might have used it on a tripod.
And it's on manual focus, which we don't want.
I was just trying to trick you, Kelly. I was making it hard for you.
Thanks so much. Testing my abilities here. Oh my goodness. So I'm nowhere near as close as what I was with the 24 or the 35 to fill the frame with the subject, but I've put it on here and I've come in and all I can see is the eye and the nose. It's so close.
Yeah. We say that the 100mm macro is a 1:1 ratio. So another way of saying that is life size. So, you know, as you get in and focus, it will be, you know, as it looks in real life.
It's pretty spectacular. Okay, so I've got to test this out here because I've been shooting at 2/3 of a stop overexposed. And without changing my ISO, I'm at 2.8 and I've come in so close, so I'm actually blocking some of the light as well. But at a 60th of a second, I'm going to take this shot and see just how well I am at focusing.
Well, you're demonstrating the image stabiliser at a 60th too, but if you've, I mean, just imagine these lenses do come with a hood as well, and it's quite long on the 100mm, so you have to take into consideration that could block your light even further.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, that was at a 60th of a second. What do we got? Is it sharp? But in terms of detail, I can come in closer. So I'm actually going to come in as close as I possibly can and and see exactly what sort of detail I can get. Now, there's my beep. So that's as close as I can get. So if you're wanting to get beautiful detail shots, then switching your main lens out to something like this for that's probably what you'd do.
So do you find that your customers do also want to get close-up
Yeah,
photos
absolutely,
as well? Yeah.
absolutely. And it's so nice to be able to fill the gallery with some of those detail shots. I mean, especially with babies, our clients really want to focus on remembering, you know, just how small and they're just getting to know all those features as well of their baby. So capturing those is a huge part of what I like to do as a baby photographer. But yeah, I tend to be a bit lazy and I stick with my 24-70, but now that we've had a bit of a play, I'm definitely going to pull my macro out a bit more often.
Yeah, and I think it's something that makes your stuff look different to other photographers' stuff as well. Like if you want to stand out, change your lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that was shot at 2.8. It is a 2.8 lens, so I don't need to shoot it at a different aperture. But yeah, I absolutely love that. Now, can I have my 24-70? Actually, no, I've got one over here.
Yeah.
Let me use yours though.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you mine, but I tell you what, I'm going to give you this 24-70, but then I'm going to let you try some of these extension tubes. See what that does.
Yeah, great. Okay. Now the weight of that feels relatively normal because that's what I'm used to. But I also know at 70 mil zoomed in, I can still get really nice and close, and I've still got space around the baby here.
Yeah, and that's it. With your zoom lenses, you can really sort of change your focal length quickly, and that's the idea of them, of course.
Yeah, that's what I love. But you know, even when I'm sort of sitting here and I'm working with the baby, I can still pick it up and I can be quite close without having to physically move my body, because we all know when we're photographing babies, they have their own agenda. They move so fast, and not always hold that position. Whereas if I had to physically get up, move back.
That's what we say with prime lenses. You zoom with your feet. You have to move yourself.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So that's at 70 mil focal length, 2.8, and I filled the frame so that we're going to be able to compare those with the 24, the 35, 50, all those other lenses that we used. We're going to be able to see the difference between those.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to introduce you to also a different way of photographing macro, which is these extension tubes. They're not particularly expensive, but you can put these in between a standard lens.
Yeah, well, let me see how close I can get without it.
Yeah, and we'll test it.
If I was to take a detail shot, like with the 100 mil macro. So it won't focus there. All right there. So that's as close as I can get at 70 mil for that focal distance. Okay, how do we do this?
Well, we put it in between the camera lens, the body and the lens.
Radio.
And you'll see there's nothing in there, so there's no optical elements or anything. It's very simple.
Just an extension tube.
So what I might do,
you do it.
is I'll put that on here, and then it just goes on the regular way.
Right. And these are pretty inexpensive, right?
Yeah, they are. They're not very expensive, and you can stack them as well. So you can put multiple extension tubes on to bring you even closer. But
and in case, so if you can't afford a 100 mil macro, this is a great option.
Very good option to start with.
Alrighty, let's see how close we can get. Oh wow. Okay, I've got to move back, have I, to focus? Or I've got to come in?
I think you've got to come in.
I think I do. There it is.
So I can hear it kind of struggling with focus a bit. So it does retain autofocus, but you might find that it does slow the performance of the lens down a little bit. You don't lose any light though, so you can retain f2.8.
I need to change my shutter speed, sorry.
So sometimes I find that when I'm using extension tubes, I may actually manual focus as well.
Wow, so that actually got me in as close as the 100mm macro.
You've lost no image quality. It's the same sharpness you'd get from the 24-70 2.8.
Wow, that's incredible. That's really, really incredible.
It's a bit of a discovery. I think they're a best kept secret, but
yeah,
I think every photographer's got to have
First time
them.
I've seen them.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow, that's so
I'm glad
good
I could
to see.
show you something.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Well, I don't have much else unless you want to try a tilt and shift lens. But
No, not today.
or we could try the 400 2.8. No?
I think I'll have to go across the road to take that shot. I think this has been an incredible exercise, and being able to show everyone the difference between those different focal lengths and going from wide into a zoom and a longer focal length is just to see that the comparison is truly amazing. So they're going to be available for you, obviously, to have a look at in close form.
Look forward to it, Kelly.
Yay, this has been fun, Greg. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. Real
You're
pleasure.
welcome.
Thank you.
Do you like my little wave?
It's beautiful.
You need a sign off.